Welcome to our second session of the Taking Care of Diabetes Together series. Last session, Caitlin shared the types of diabetes, risk factors, and long-term effects, and today we're going to discuss the role of diet has in managing diabetes. We'll discuss ways to help clients avoid blood sugar highs and lows so they have energy to thrive each day with healthy, balanced meals and snacks. My name is Rachel Mannon. I'm going to be the moderator today while Chris is teaching. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition educator with Illinois Extension. I'm located in the heart of the university. I serve Champaign, Ford, Iroquois, and Vermilion counties. And in my free time, I like to spend time with my family at our lake house. And our presenter today is Chris Jules. She is a nutrition and wellness educator and registered dietitian with University of Illinois Extension, and she's located in the southern part of the state, serving Madison, Monroe, and St. Clair counties. She teaches community classes for all ages on chronic disease, food safety, cooking skills, and teen health. She has two very active teenage girls who keep her quite busy attending all of their sporting events. And then who University of Illinois Extension is, we are affiliated with the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and we offer evidence-based educational programs to residents all over Illinois across the 102 counties.
Good afternoon. We welcome you guys back for those that are new for the first week or those who joined us last week, welcome back. Today we would like to share about eating habits and some ways we can help control blood sugars, either in yourselves or those that you care for. I would like to start today with a question, and feel free to add your answers in the chat box. What do you find most challenging about caring for individuals with diabetes? So diet is a lot, obviously, can be a challenge for everyone. Eating habits, skipping meals, choosing healthy snacks over some of the tastier snacks is a challenge for everyone, I think. Okay, and the ability to control intake, skipping meals. Okay, maybe healthier choices. Okay, thank you for participating. That you feel free to, you can keep going. Our goal today, or my goal today, is to help you work through some of these challenges and offer tips and advice. So hopefully by the end of today, some of this will get a little bit easier, and we will work through some of these challenges. So when managing diabetes, we have two goals in mind: to maintain blood glucose levels within a normal range and to prevent blood sugar spikes to reduce those risks of complications. And Caitlin had mentioned those complications last week were heart disease and eye health complications with your vision, peripheral vascular disease. So a lot of things can occur with uncontrolled blood sugars. And one thing about diabetes is often people don't feel too poorly when their sugars are running high, which is why, according to the CDC, in 2021, over 8 million Americans have diabetes but have not been diagnosed. So it can be difficult to recognize those symptoms until they get worse enough for you to realize that you may be having or struggling with diabetes. And then it can also make it difficult for those with a diagnosis to understand how important it is to keep blood sugar under control, especially if they seem to be feeling okay. As a caregiver, it's essential to encourage those healthy, balanced meals, regular physical activity, taking medication timely, managing stress, and making sure they're followed by a healthcare team, including physicians, dietitians, and anyone else that's pharmacy, anyone else that's needed in that team. Today, in our portion today, we are going to talk mostly about the healthy eating aspect of diabetes management, but seems to again give us the most challenge, especially when caring for others. So maintaining stable blood sugars is crucial for preventing those long-term complications, and our diet plays a major role in achieving that balance. So the first step is to establish a routine by trying to eat meals and snacks about the same time every day and taking those medications as prescribed. Sometimes when having diabetes, whether or not insulin dependent, people taking insulin can depend on how much they take, depending on how many carbohydrates they they consume. And of course, that can be a challenge of it in itself. You need to be a little bit more competent in counting the carbohydrates and things like that. Um, but following that routine by eating meals and snacks at the same time, taking the medications, and then it's important to provide or encourage a consistent amount of those healthy carbohydrates for each meal and snack while ensuring that meals are not skipped. So trying to maintain those blood sugars throughout the day is the best way. And ideally, clients should follow a meal plan that includes well-balanced meals and snacks to effectively maintain those blood sugar levels. Being aware of portion sizes is obviously very important. We can give them good foods, but sometimes if the portions are too big, it still can cause elevated blood sugars. And food does play an important role in our lives and the people we care for. Sometimes it's what people look most forward to in their day, which is why it can be even more challenging when working with individuals with diabetes and disabilities. Prior to this position at the extension, I worked in healthcare, worked in nursing homes, hospitals, and I will tell you in the nursing home, mealtime was a social time for them, and very important aspect of their care in the facility. So we still always want to take that into account, how important meals are for individuals. And it's also essential to take any of their limitations into account. Managing diabetes should be an individualized approach. And for example, those living with learning disabilities, they may need assistance with reading food labels and visual aids when teaching healthy choices. So instead of just, telling them healthy choices, having more maybe cue cards or explaining maybe why this may be a healthier choice than something else, than another option. Also, with physical activity programs might need to be modified for impairments. Like seated exercises like chair yoga are always great. If there's, swimming pools available and that's something that's possible that can help limit some of the pressure and things on joints, and be a great exercise that way. But again, just being cognizant of being aware that some of those limitations exist. And for administrating medications or taking blood sugars may be difficult for those with sensory disabilities, and those regimens may need to be modified. So taking blood sugars is painful, and some individuals may really have a hard time with that. So maybe that continuing glucose monitoring system might be a great option for those individuals. And living with diabetes can be emotional for anyone. So being empathetic and understanding can help build trust between you and your clients' loved ones. So no one really likes to be told no. So when we say good foods, bad foods, it kind of, everybody wants the bad food when you're told not to eat it. So we really try to focus on including all different types of foods and working with any type of disability that's needs assistance. So we have mentioned that diet can play a role in diabetes care. And if you know anyone that has diabetes, you are probably aware sugar is often the bad guy. But why is that? So that's what we're going to explore a little bit more here. And if it really is the bad guy. So here we have the My Plate, and you may or may not be familiar with this, but this provides guidelines on meal planning for healthy Americans. So the goal for a healthy diet for anyone, basically, and with a diagnosis of diabetes, is to eat a variety of nutrient-dense foods from all of these 5 food groups. And you can see this is an ideal plate. So if we had our wish and we could prepare a meal, it would include 1/4 of your plate fruits, 1/4 vegetables, 1/4 grains, 1/4 protein, and a serving of dairy. So foods are made up of macronutrients, micronutrients, and water. So some words there you may not have heard of, but I'm sure you've heard of the carbohydrates and the proteins and the fats. So those are all the nutrients that make up the macronutrients. These are essential to provide various body functions. Carbohydrates, we know we do need carbohydrates, and they provide energy for all of our cells in our bodies to do the things that they need to do. Protein builds muscle and repairs tissue, produces enzymes, and supports immunity. And fat provides energy, so it helps absorb vitamins and protect your organs. And then we have micronutrients, which are our vitamins and minerals. Again, those are essential for many other bodily functions that occur. And we also can't forget about water. So water makes up over 60% of our body and performs many essential functions. So I always feel it's a good idea to have a basic knowledge of, the foods that make up our diet and where they come from. So the food groups in my plate contain all those different macronutrients and micronutrients. So, for example, the grain group mostly contains carbohydrates, and the protein group mostly contains protein. Now, the dairy group actually contains carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So, getting a whole variety of foods from these different food groups is what's going to help meet nutritional needs the best. Comes to diabetes meal planning has actually evolved over the years. Years ago, whenever I first started out as a dietitian, we would teach about the diabetes meal exchange or meal planning. We would discuss the exchange list, which would include choices from all the food groups and was quite confusing. It would tell you how much meat to eat, how much starch, fruit, vegetable, grain. But we have learned that it's difficult for people to stick to that strict regimen, and we need to meet people where they are today. So our bodies are all different, and some foods may raise my blood sugar, but not someone else's. So I think that's why we really need to understand that it's more of an individualized approach as much as possible. So if you have a client and you're monitoring blood sugars and you notice it's more elevated this afternoon than normal, maybe checking to see what they had for lunch or what they had for a snack, and if it's something out of their normal regimen. And again, it could be one of those good healthy carbohydrates, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But sometimes it will still raise blood sugars, and again, everyone's different. So most importantly, the diabetes diet is a healthy way of eating balanced meals, and then it's not necessarily a diet. So there are a few meal planning methods, options that are available. The simplest one is going to be the diabetes plate method, which is quite similar to how we talked about my plate, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. So with diabetes, meals will look just a little bit different. So we start with a 9-inch plate and divide as we see on this page here. So it has an imaginary line down the middle, and you'll see on half of it, those are non-starchy vegetables. And on the original my plate, it was vegetables and fruit. So fruit, we like to include that maybe in a snack, or it could be in place of maybe the starchy vegetables. But the half of the plate with the non-starchy vegetables, we kind of sometimes consider that like a free food. So as long as you're not adding a bunch of extra fat, then it's going to help meet your nutritional needs and doesn't usually have a whole lot of carbohydrates. And then you'll see a smaller section. There will be whole grain or starchy foods. So that would include your starchy vegetables. So those would be if you eat potatoes, corn, peas. Those are the top starchy vegetables. And that would include that you could either have a starchy vegetable or a whole grain. So that's kind of where the big difference is where we want to make sure that we realize that those starchy vegetables can increase blood sugars. So we will want to, not avoid them, but we will just want to count them in our full meal plan. And then we have a small amount of fresh fruits, and those also contain some carbohydrates, but it's good for us. They're good for us. And then 1/4 of your plate with the lean protein, and then either water or skim milk. So, and again, in an ideal world, this is what a plate for a person with diabetes would have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But we know sometimes that's not always the easiest way to, we don't always sit down and have well-balanced meals, but there are other ways that we can make sure we're getting all the nutrients that we need. Okay, so the big question is, can people with diabetes eat carbs? The answer is yes. However, there is a but. So we will talk about that throughout the rest here. if you remember how our body gets energy, we talked about this last week with Caitlin, but here's just a quick review because I think it's real important to understand, why we make these recommendations. So food is turned into energy during the complex metabolic process. Once your food is broken down, it is converted into a form of glucose that our bodies can use. The glucose is then used by our cells of our body for energy. However, in order for our cells to access the glucose, we need a hormone called insulin. And remember, in diabetes, either we're not making enough insulin or it's not getting into the cells like it needs to. So without the insulin, the sugar can build up in our blood and cause our bodies to not work properly and cause all those symptoms and things. Your body breaks down most of the food you eat into sugar and releases it into your bloodstream. So when your blood sugar goes up, it signals your pancreas to release that insulin. And then insulin acts like a key to let the blood sugar into your body cells to use as energy. But again, if that's not working, the glucose will spill over into your blood and cause some of those other complications and not giving you energy as well. So where do carbohydrates fit? So carbohydrates, along with proteins and fats, are one of those main nutrients that we talked about, main macronutrients found in the foods and the beverages that we consume. They provide energy to the body's cells, tissues, and organs. The body breaks down carbs into glucose, which is the type of sugar. And carbs are made up of those sugars, starches, and fibers. And there are two general categories of carbohydrates. And I think we had this question last week. So we talked about simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. Your body breaks down all carbohydrates into glucose. And that glucose or blood sugar is the main source of energy for all the body cells, tissues, and organs. So glucose can be used immediately, or it can be stored in the liver and muscles for later years. And then this is where the but comes in, we mentioned earlier. The type and the amount of carbohydrates you consume are important because not all carbohydrates are created equal. And this is because some carbohydrates will raise blood sugar levels much faster than others. So those are going to be those simple carbohydrates. And then consuming at any time too many carbohydrates at a time can also raise those blood sugar levels. So again, carbohydrates are needed for a healthy diet to help you meet those essential nutrient needs. But again, it depends on the type and the amount. Here's a list here of the foods that can't contain carbohydrates. Their carbohydrates or carbs are mainly found in plant foods. However, they can also occur in dairy products in the form of a milk sugar called lactose. So if you've heard of lactose, that's related, that is from the milk when that's broken down. And foods high in carbohydrates include, your breads, pasta, beans, potatoes, rice, corn, cereals. So we think of the starchy foods, the starchy vegetables, and fruits. Fruits typically can either be a simple or complex carbohydrates. If they have the peeling on them still, then you're going to get some more fiber, so it can be considered in the complex carbohydrate. And then we also have our sweets and processed foods that most of us know contain sugar and will fall in that carbohydrate category. So here we have listed some of the better carbohydrate choices. When having diabetes and eating carbohydrates, it's essential to choose better or healthier carb choices to get those essential nutrients such as the fiber. The fiber will also help stabilize your blood sugar, not only providing the necessary nutrients. Whole grains, fiber-rich vegetables and fruits, beans are considered those complex carbohydrates since they contain more fiber, and they will not raise your blood sugars as quickly as simple carbohydrates like the sweets and fruit juices do. As far as fruits go, you want to go for the fresh ones, and if you do canned, you want to do canned in their own juice. Frozen fruits, and then dried fruits, you just want a very small amount of those because it's more concentrated as the fruit is dried. So those can raise your blood sugars a little bit quicker too, but they are still going to be healthier for us than some of those processed foods and sweets. And then dairy products, we mentioned, are a simple carbohydrate, but because they can sometimes raise your blood sugar a little bit quicker than some of these other choices. However, dairy is a great source of that protein and other essential nutrients for your diet, like vitamin D and A. And a lot of times, if we're drinking milk, it does have protein in it, so that can help stabilize your blood sugar a little bit there. And we're usually eating it with something else, so that will help prevent those spikes. And the question, can all carbs fit? So the simple carbohydrates are simple sugars. They are made up of shorter chains of molecules and are easy and more quickly digested. So when you're talking about those, we're talking about sweets and desserts, soft drinks, some processed foods. They have little to no fiber, but of course, they taste wonderful, right? So we want to know if we can include those in our diets. The answer is occasionally and in moderation. So we know that the foods are all around us, and we talked earlier about how food is so social, and it means it's very important to people. So, in small amounts, it's okay. Watching those blood sugars is always important as well. And then it's always a good idea if you pair it with a protein or a fiber. So when we consume sugar, by itself, these simple sugars, our blood sugar will spike quite quickly. But whenever it's consumed with a protein or fiber, it's going to help, again, stabilize that a little bit and help maintain it a little bit longer. So for an example, white rice would be considered a simple carbohydrate. Now, if it was brown rice, it's going to have more fiber and maybe last a little bit longer and not cause quite that spike. Now I do have a diabetes support group, and most of the people in that group say they cannot consume white rice, without a really high spike in their blood sugar. So, and some say brown rice is a little bit better. Point is, again, it's always individualized. So keep an eye on those blood sugars and seeing what affects them the most. But a lot of times if we stick to that portion size of what that rice is, it's only supposed to be like a third of a cup, then we can see that, yeah, you don't get a whole lot of that, but you can eat a whole lot more of those non-starchy vegetables and feel full longer and not worry so much about the blood sugar spikes. So skip the bread if dessert is offered. So sometimes too, if we try to think about how many carbohydrates, if you go back to that meal planning, how many things are going to be offered at that meal. So if there's bread and desserts, maybe just offer one or the other. So we're not overloading with those items. And then those late night sweets, we often get the question, is it okay to eat snacks after, a certain time? And yes, we're still fueling our body, you're still burning calories, but a lot of times when we eat late, we tend up eating higher calorie, more, I would say, junk food items. Just that's kind of the habit we get into. So that's when we're going to add on extra sugar, extra calories that aren't necessarily needed. So, and then if your activity is lower, you're not moving around as much, activity can help lower your blood sugar. So it's going to cause those spikes as well. So typically, in general, simple carbohydrates are going to raise that blood sugar quicker than complex carbohydrates that have more fiber and protein in them. Okay, so I always like to talk about snacks. So we kind of talked about meals, ideal meals, how to do a balanced diet, and hopefully, if you're working at a center or meals are prepared for clients, hopefully, there is already a menu pre-planned. And if not, this hopefully will be helpful for you. But snacks, we always want to talk, snacks can be beneficial. Snacks don't have to be a bad thing, especially, with blood sugar control. So helping prevent low glycemic episodes is very important as well, especially if someone's on insulin. And eating every, 3 to 4 hours can help prevent blood sugar dips and spikes. So again, they can be essential for steady energy. Replacing typical junk food like chips, candy, and soda with snacks that contain fiber, protein, and healthy fats is again going to help maintain that blood sugar as well. So keeping healthy snacks available and pre-portioned in bags for easy grab and go is a great idea. Keeping sugary treats out of sight when possible to avoid temptations. I know even for myself at home, if we have a basket on the counter full of treats, I'm not even hungry, but I'm going to go buy it and maybe have a piece of candy on this trip by and then the trip back to the kitchen. So again, out of sight, out of mind is kind of a good rule of thumb. I know it's sometimes hard to keep everything out of sight, but just having those available for special occasions. And then the pre-portions in bags. So of course, you always like to save a little bit of money here and there. And if we have some of those healthier snacks, maybe like nuts and seeds, you can mix with a little bit of dried fruit and then have those pre-portioned and ready to go, uh, more available rather than using a having a whole bag of a snack will help with that portion size. And then here are some ideas, healthy options. So it's always a great idea to try to pair a food that's a carbohydrate food and something that's higher in protein. So like a rice cake with peanut butter would be a good option. That peanut butter will help stabilize that blood sugar a little bit more. And veggie sticks, the Greek yogurt with ranch dressing. Greek yogurt's going to also have some protein. Air popped popcorn would be a good option. And you can maybe add a cheese stick with that to give yourself a little protein. Yogurt, apple slices with peanut butter, cottage cheese. Cottage cheese has been a lot of great new recipes, or it's been quite trendy here lately. So a lot of great recipes are available with cottage cheese. So again, be aware of some things that can be done with that to help cut down carbohydrates too. The trail mix with nuts and dried fruit. This is a great option. Again, just watching that portion size, not to overdo it. And then string cheese, whole grain crackers. Again, some other options. And we can't really talk too much about carbohydrates if we don't look at the food label. So the label is an essential tool to use when planning meals and snacks. So right here, we'll take a quick look at this label. So we're checking the serving sizes first. You always want to look at serving size and servings per container because occasionally, especially if it's in a small bag, sometimes we don't realize that those are 2 to 3 servings in those bags, which means we would have to multiply everything by 2. So if that was 2 servings. So for example, this item is 8 servings. If you would to eat 2/3 cup, if you would eat 2 of those servings, you would have to multiply everything by 2. So it's always a good idea to have measuring cups available too, especially when you're starting out to pay attention to carbohydrates and how many grams the servings you're supposed to get and how many you should have to see how much is in a half a cup or 1 cup. And then once you get that idea, you can put those away. You have a better idea of the measurements. So, and then we look at the calories, and calories are needed to provide energy for your body to function and grow. So important there. Nutrients, and then this is where you see all the macronutrients. And of course, with diabetes, we're going to be focusing on those total carbohydrates. And we always want that dietary fiber to be, higher, and those total added sugars, as you can see now, it has added sugars, that one to be a little bit lower. And a good rule of thumb at that percent daily value, if it's 20% or more, it's typically that food is pretty high in that. So whatever item this is here, it has 10 grams of added sugar, 20% daily value. So that's based on a 2,000 calorie diet. And we might want to say, oh, this one's a little bit too high in sugar for a snack. So we might want to choose something else for that. Now we know if it's 5% is a good rule of thumb to look at. If it's less than 5%, that's a little bit lower, so maybe a better choice. And then we like to look for foods also, again, low in trans and saturated fat, cholesterol, and those foods in the high in fiber, vitamin D. You can see the nutrients on the bottom there, the vitamin D, calcium, iron, potassium. Those are typically short fall in most American diets, so that's the ones we focus on, and those have made the nutrition facts label. So again, those numbers a little bit higher is great for you. And then general recommendation. So again, I mentioned multiple times that a diet with diabetes control should be individualized, and again, very important to pay attention, especially if you have someone that's on insulin, to keep track of which foods raise blood sugars the most. But in general, a good rule of thumb is 45 to 60 grams of total carbohydrates per meal. and then 15 to 30 per snack. So again, you can see this on the food label, and I kind of have that line going over the carbohydrates there. But if you can see that, it says 37 grams of carbohydrates per serving per 2/3 cup. So whatever this food is, it could fit into that meal, and then you would have some more carbohydrates, some more grams of carbohydrates to spare for another food. So in summary, when we talk about a well-balanced diet, a healthy diet can be achieved. Again, and this is not a diet just for people with diabetes. It's great for anyone. In a typical diet, or again, I hate the word diet, but a typical meal plan for all individuals. So focusing on more whole grains, more fruits, more of the non-starchy vegetables, low fat or non-fat dairy products, lean meats and alternatives. Alternatives, I mean more of like the plant protein based items. So like soy protein, nuts, seeds, things like that. And then consistent, well-balanced meals and snacks is crucial for that blood sugar control. And when looking at some of the things that we should cut out a little bit more are those processed foods or refined carbs. Those can increase those blood sugars. Food and beverages with the added sugars, so soft drinks, candies, things like that. Try to avoid skipping meals and overdoing portion sizes as well. And maybe not following these all, starting all, if you don't do these all, just do one at a time and try to work on doing things one at a time. And then I think it's important to support clients' independence and dignity will actually help manage diabetes in the long term. So encouraging, family members or clients, whoever you're caring for, to do as much for him or herself as they are able. So providing that independence, respecting preferences. Not everyone likes yogurt or veggies. We know that they are great for us, but not everybody prefers them. So work with them to find those foods that can fit into their preferences and be healthier choices. And we really like, and this is, with anyone, try to avoid identifying good foods or bad foods. We like to say there's better choices, maybe less healthy choices. But again, putting that stigma on good food, bad food is going to make us want those bad foods a little bit more often sometimes. It's just our nature. But offering alternatives to those high sugary foods, and sometimes those sweets and treats can fit into a healthy diet as long as the portions are limited, blood sugars are monitored. That's, what we really need to look at. And then communicate clearly and have patience. Clients may need to be frequently reminded why it's important to control their blood sugars. Again, especially if they aren't having any symptoms and they feel fine, they don't understand. A lot of us, it's hard to understand why it's so important to control those blood sugars. So maybe make it personal if you can. So if they like going out with family or friends, or maybe encourage them to keep that blood sugar under control. So allow them to be healthy so they can spend time with those family members. And then celebrate success. So if we're working on, adding more vegetables to the diet this week, trying new things, or, limiting the soda from 5 a week to maybe 1 a week. Making small steps, I think, and then celebrating those successes in non-food related ways. So maybe going to the park, movie, whatever those individuals prefer. So Rachel, have you been able to take a look at the chat box and maybe look at some questions for
Yeah,
us?
so the first question is, what advice do you have on artificial sugars? Is one better than the other?
Artificial sugars, again, there's off and on research on there. It just kind of depends on preference. Again, not overdoing one or the other. The different, some are made more natural from plants, like the stevia brand is plants. But again, if you're, using them in small amounts, not overdoing it, I think anyone is fine right now.
People told me to eliminate all carbs, but I think you should eat whole grains, which is right.
Yeah, so definitely eliminating any food group is not going to give your body the nutrients that it needs. So going for the whole grains is going to be your best bet. So you make sure you're getting fiber and the other nutrients your body needs. Maybe cutting down could be concerning, you know, maybe one option, but I would not eliminate it unless there are certain ones, maybe like the brown rice or brown pasta or something that might, or like whole wheat pasta that you notice definitely increases your blood sugar. Otherwise, eliminating any of the food groups is not a good option.
Is zero sugar better than diet soda?
So basically, the zero sugar is just using a different type of sweetener. So it's mostly about preference.
I get that we have a cap for the carbs for each meal, but what is the cap for carbs per day?
So if you want to add it, it depends where you're at. So if you add up the 45 to 60 per meal and then the 15 to 30 for like two snacks per day. So depends, you know, how your sugars are. For women, we typically go on the lower end of that recommendation. Men usually get to consume more calories, they burn more calories, so typically the higher end, but it really depends on how many your overall calorie needs are.
And this is Caitlin. I wanted to add on to that question about, how many carbohydrates per day. I had a person in a class last year, a very tall gentleman, young in his 40s, had type 2 diabetes, and his doctor had recommended closer to 60 to 75 grams of carbohydrate per meal, partly because he's super tall, he's very young, and then he's also someone that likes to do CrossFit, so he's very physically active. And so I think, as Chris mentioned, right, this is very individual to each person. So for someone like him, his doctor really recommended, like, you're going to need a lot more carbohydrates to fuel all of the sport that you're doing in CrossFit. So this is going to be something that's very individual to each person.
Yes, definitely. It's kind of just a good place to start. And then if you know if your blood sugars are still running high or, you know, you're feeling okay, you know, and your weight's okay, then, you know, you can add more or decrease that amount.
Hi, I do have one question.
Yes.
My name is Mary. We are starting to see an older population. Before, when I first started, I've been here 40 years, and our residents were much more active, and they did a lot of sports and stuff. And now we've gone down from maybe 3 or 4 teams to down one team, and we have over 200 and some residents that are here. So I guess my question is, as people aged, does it seem like the diabetes is kicking in more because of the lack of activity, even though we do try and encourage them to get their butt up and move a little bit? Do you see what I'm saying?
Definitely diabetes. Well, type 2 diabetes tends to set in later on in life. So unfortunately, yes, inactivity is a huge risk factor, as well
Yeah.
as genetics, as well as the diets.
Right. I mean, and we have a dietitian and we encourage, but of course, their favorite things, of course, are snackies and that lovely pop machine that seems to be around everywhere.
Mhm.
But we are trying to do more water and things like that. But we actually have one young lady that feels like she likes to cheat all the time. So if she cheats when she's doing too much sugar, she'll drink a lot of water. So we have some folks that are pretty smart in some of the ways of trying to not let us know what her accurate sugar reading is when she tests. Mhm.
Right. Well, I would say the water would be able to flush it, a lot of it out, but yeah,
Yeah. Pretty tricky that she learned that, right? Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and to piggyback off on that, the type 2 diabetes typically settles in later in life, but there over the past few years, like 10 years or so, there's actually been an increase of adolescent type 2 diabetes, and they can get diagnosed as young as like in their teens, um, because of like diet culture and physical activity. So that's an interesting thing to see. And then there's another question in here that says, what are your thoughts on the new shots like Ozempic and diabetes, people with diabetes taking them?
Again, that's going to be a more individual answer, I would think. Just talk with your, you know, your provider and your medical team. I don't really want to give out medical advice. However, you know, we do see they're beneficial for losing weight, and a lot of times when individuals lose weight, their diabetes this is a lot easier to control. So I can say that. I don't know if you guys want to add anything, but
Yeah, and these drugs are still very new, so
yeah.
the research is going to take a couple years to catch up and really see how they impact not just in like a 6-week period, but over the course of a couple years, and seeing how that impacts people's management of their diabetes. And then we'll be able to we'll still end up referring you back to your primary doctor or a diabetes educator or someone in your personal care team to talk to you more about those options. But yeah, the drugs are still really new, so it's going to take a little time to figure out what works well for each person.
It is exciting to see, positivity so far.
Are there heart issues with diabetes?
So yeah, actually, diabetes is the #1 risk factor for developing cardiovascular disease. And we kind of mentioned a real brief reason last week was with diabetes, again, your blood is carrying around extra blood sugar or glucose or sugar in your blood, and goes through those, your arteries, and can be a little stickier. The easiest way to put it, it can cause, arteries to clog, and it does not get into some of those very small capillaries that are going to, your legs and your feet that can cause some peripheral vascular disease. So again, they're all related to how the heart pumps and how the blood flows. And yeah, definitely a major risk factor for diabetes. And a lot of times physicians will add medications for cholesterol and things, even if your cholesterol is not elevated, just as a preventative measure. And we also have a diabetes website through Extension, a whole section devoted just to diabetes. So a lot of great information on there. Do you guys know that address offhand, Rachel or Caitlin? Oh, well, there's Healthy Heart. There you go. I think it's just go.illinois/ diabetes. There we go.
When you have cardiac issues, you're told to have a low salt diet, then you are diabetic. Then you are diabetic. On top of that, what is left to eat?
Can be a challenge, but that's when we really try to look more of the whole foods. So unfortunately, those quick and easy processed foods are going to be loaded with those extra sugars and salts. So again, small steps, but trying to, if you can, prepare more foods at home, or work with a neighbor or a friend and start, food preparation together, but trying to use some substitutes for the high salt seasonings as well. But again, the diabetes, you can include most foods, and maybe just watch a little bit on those real high sugary foods. Sounds easier than it is to do. I completely understand. But as you know, both of them usually go together. So if you're following, guidelines for diabetes control, it's best to follow the salt substitutes. Salt substitutes. Let's see. So maybe using more herbs and spices. So your basil, oregano, garlic. And then there are some, like the Mrs. Dash salt substitutes available, as long as you're not on any like potassium medications. You would check with your physician about that. But yeah, I found quite a few of the Mrs. Dash substitutes that have a lot of different flavors with them and can be easily used.